I'm a really big believer that software costs can really quickly run away from you. And I think, especially with capital markets being constrained, companies are doing more with less tools.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Optimized Show. I'm brought to you by SpendFlow. I'm your host for the episode, David Kim, and I'm an account executive here at SpendFlow. SpendFlow is a unified SaaS buying and management solution that enables high growth businesses to buy, renew, and manage SaaS subscriptions. Today, we're joined by Nicole Jordan-Dahdal, the Vice President of Finance at Clovers, a people-first hiring intelligence platform. She's a finance executive with a strong track record in leading finance and HR at high-growth startups, spearheading strategic initiatives and driving profitability. Welcome, Nicole. It's our pleasure to host you today.
Thanks so much, David. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. Absolutely. Well, Nicole, the financial landscape is evolving at a very rapid pace, as you know, driven by a surge of innovative tools and automation. Today, we're going to be delving into the impact of technology on financial decision making and exploring the challenges as well as the opportunities that it presents. So, Nicole, before we dive into the topic of today's podcast, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your experience as a finance professional, the organizations that you've worked with, and your journey so far in finance?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a pretty varied background, which I think is one of my biggest strengths. I've worked at companies from commercial real estate to media to SaaS. I've been all over the map, and I ultimately landed at SaaS in the startup sphere because I was really interested and intrigued in how they operated. Earlier in my career, I spent quite a bit of time in corporate FP&A and then also a large amount of time in asset management in commercial real estate. So because of that, I have a really strong operational background in addition to my strategic finance background. Strategic
Wow.
finance is my first love. I love FP&A, running things in Excel, building models. I love that so much. But I'm also really fascinated by operations, and part of what I love working at a startup is that it allows me to flex both of those muscles and really be sure that financial operations are streamlined really well and they're built in such a way that as we grow, we're not going to hit some sort of bottleneck on the financial side. I never want to tell my sales team I'm not set up to do that. You can't do this deal because I'm not set up on the finance side to build them.
Most definitely. Yeah, I mean, as an account executive, having a finance leader like you working on top of me, I mean, that would be best. If you are enabling the revenue organization to do what they do best and make sure that the finance organization is prepared to take on something like that. So that's really cool. Quick side question, is Google Sheets equivalent to what Excel is able to offer you, or is there just a complete clear, strength to Excel?
It's funny, when I joined Clovers, we use Google. Google's our ecosystem, right? Except for meetings, we use Zoom. But we use Google Docs, Google Sheets, everything. And when I joined, I saw that, they wanted all my files in Google Sheets. And I went to the CEO and I was like, look, I cannot function in Google Sheets. Like, I'm like half as fast. I get things done half as quickly and not as well. Please let me buy, Excel, put it on my computer. I have a PC because I'm not as good on a Mac either, right? So like I have to
Yeah.
have a PC and I have to have Excel. And he was like, okay, I guess, you can be the only one that uses Excel. So like I basically work in Excel and then I have to upload my files into Google so that, people can access them. But Google Sheets just doesn't have the functionality for one.
It
And for
doesn't. Yeah.
two, I also feel like because it's, connected to the internet, it's slower. And like when you're moving
Right.
really, really, really quickly through Excel and using just keyboard shortcuts and things like that, I don't need to be connected to the internet and slowing things down with the constant saving. Like I don't want
Yeah.
that. So I don't have autosave turned on, like any of that. It just slows me down. So yes,
Thank
I'm a
you.
very
Yeah,
strong believer.
you're speaking my language because I remember, when Google Sheets started coming on to become a little bit more prevalent, I tried to use it, but just like you said, as a Windows or PC user trying to use Mac, where command does not equal
Yes.
control,
Nope.
keyboard shortcuts get just extremely confusing. And then you add going from Excel to Google Sheet, and then the keyboard shortcuts don't translate there either. It just becomes this whole new language of having to
Yeah.
learn keyboard shortcuts and all that. So I thought I'd ask. You probably spend so much time within spreadsheets that you have a strong opinion on what is better.
I
And here it is. It's
and I
Excel.
do. I fought multiple of my bosses and, letting me maintain my Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Just
it's a
like
thing.
just like right now. Yeah,
It's a
it's just the
thing.
expectations that need to be set. We're working out of Excel, at least me. But hey, Nicole, given your experience, I'd be curious to understand. So what are the essential competencies that you would say modern finance leaders need to possess to effectively serve as strategic partners to the organization?
It's a great question because I have a lot of strong opinions and feelings about a lot of these things, but this is
Yeah.
another one. Historically, CEOs and CFOs, excuse me, and finance leaders have often come from a CPA and accounting background. And I'm seeing more of a shift toward, a strategic finance or an FP&A background of these executives to really help set the vision, not just for the finance team, but for the entire financial strategy of the organization. I think finance leaders are going to need to have a really deep understanding of operations of the business too, and obviously strong relationships with the rest of the executive team. And then, of course, usually they have teams to lead, so they need to have strong leadership skills. But for me, as I've been looking at it, obviously, having understanding the basics of accounting is crucial, but I really do think we're seeing the shift more towards having a really deep strategic and or operational understanding of the entire business, and then leveraging that into the financial strategy, and then having a really, really good controller to be sure that the accounting side is really well put together.
Yeah. I love that. And an interesting thing that I can pull from, I remember I never really kind of compartmentalized the skill sets of a CFO to be a technical finance leader to an operational minded finance leader. I remember the first time that I was enlightened in these two different skill sets, and that not every single CFO harnesses both, or not every single CFO harnesses the operational excellence of the CFO role. I remember it was when I was at an F-Suite conference. I think F-Suite is one of the,
Yeah.
finance leader communities that are out there. And they brought on a guest speaker, the CFO of 10x Genomics, I believe, and he really had a pride behind his operational finance leadership. And I remember listening to his segment during that conference, and just thought it really lit a light bulb in my head of wow, like CFOs roles are not just about being technical and in the books and compliance and risk management. It does get into having a very clear understanding of the operations of that business and that industry, and being able to apply your thought process, your critical thinking into helping grow the business and whatever else is a priority for them. So that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a member of F-Suite. They're awesome. But but yeah, that's what I've seen a lot. And I feel like because, if you just look at the P&L, for instance, it touches everything. Like, every department, right? So if you don't have at least a basic concept of what your engineering team is doing, it's going to be really hard to help them forecast because the engineers don't have a strong background in forecasting, right? So you need to help them and show them the way and how it's done.
Right.
And if you don't understand what they're doing, if you don't understand what marketing is doing, if you don't understand what the sales team is doing, it's really hard to get an accurate forecast. So that's part of where the operations piece comes in and why I think it's becoming so much more crucial than it has in the past.
Yeah, definitely. But on this
Definitely
note,
awesome.
Nicole, I want to ask about, as we are on this topic of how tools are helping you with some financial automation as well as financial decision making, I wanted to understand how are finance leaders leveraging analytical tools to forecast financial trends and making smarter moves for the organization? Because I know right now it's about making the right, deliberate decisions for the company and pivoting where you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm familiar with a lot of there's been a recent surge of financial forecasting tools out there over the last few years. And I'm familiar with a lot of them and I'm sure they have a lot of value. But as I told you a few minutes ago, I'm a really big fan of Excel. If you build your models right, It really doesn't require that much manual effort at the end of each month to update actuals or to reforecast things. It's really not that much effort. And it's a pretty cheap tool. And Clovers in particular, we're a relatively small company, so we don't have a ton of extra tools that we use. In fact, I'm a really big believer that software costs can really quickly run away from you. And David, I'm sure you agree with me on that.
Yeah.
And so, particularly for the finance team, I really have to be able to justify what I'm spending money on. So for me, it's Excel. And for forecasting, I think, especially in the SaaS side of things, revenue is crucial. It can be one of the more challenging things to forecast. So anything like we use Maxio for our revenue
Yeah.
recognition and invoicing, they really allow us to get a really solid grasp on our current customers, and then it allows us to forecast much easier. Things I can just drop into my Excel model at the end of the month, and it just, you know, spits out the updated forecast. And then QuickBooks, something from an accounting perspective, right? You got to be able to track actuals in order to forecast. So something like QuickBooks, I'm a really big fan of QuickBooks Online, been using it for a while. And I also am a really big believer in Salesforce. I love Salesforce, right? I don't think you can get a really good a forecast of revenue without having a solid understanding of your pipeline, right? And storing it in a tool like Salesforce it's one of the best tools in my opinion. So
Mhm.
on the revenue side, those are the tools that I really like to use and what I feel like can really be with your company for a lot of growth before you really need to invest in anything more intense than that. But on the expense side, obviously using a software like SpendFlow was extremely helpful to make sure you've got control of your software spend because I found, particularly in SaaS, three of the biggest things we spend money on: headcount, hosting, and software, right? So anything you can do to really understand your software spend and your headcount spend is also going to help you forecast much, much better. So I think as far as the trends you were asking about, I think especially with capital markets being constrained, companies are doing more with less tools. And so you really want a tool that can not be that expensive, cover all your bases, and have a really good ROI if it is going to be more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with everything, every single, platform, or if we want to call it that, but tool that you've mentioned, I mean, it really does help to have the right implementation and it just have the right setup going into it. So I know it's a big requirement to make sure that, hey, once that foundation is set and if everything is implemented correctly, that's when we can get a lot of time savings, that things are more
Yeah.
automated by the systems that we use. Unfortunately, I'm sure there are instances in the past that many finance leaders have gone through before where implementation didn't go all that well. Things aren't configured or set up in the way that they wanted to. So I know those pains, from having spoken to a lot of them. If we were to park into or double click into Salesforce, I'd be curious because I do think, CFOs that I've worked with in the past, they like to live in Salesforce at least to get an understanding of the revenue stream. Now, for you, for Salesforce, is it something that you would say you're in there almost every day? Are you going in there more on a weekly basis? Or how frequently would you say you go in there to check out some of the reports that's been created by either RevOps or you yourself in the finance department?
That's a great question. It probably depends. Closer towards the end of the month, I'm in it a
Yeah.
little bit more often. We also, to be honest, we have a great team here. And so our sales team is very communicative. So I don't have to go in every day because
Nice.
they're always telling me what's going on. And we're a small company. I don't have to go in and, double check their work every day because they're telling me what's going on. Hey, this deal's close. Hey, this deal's not. We have weekly meetings. So I'm in it definitely a few times a week, just, to check everything out, make sure things are still on track. And then definitely in preparation for those weekly meetings, like, hey, where's this deal? Let's make sure we have a solid understanding of where some of these renewals are at too. But
Yeah.
my sales team is super communicative and I'm really lucky. But at prior
That's
companies, I've
good.
definitely had to be in it more often. And I've had to be a little bit more, I've had to have a little bit more oversight and remind people a little more often, hey, let's be sure this deal's updated. Let's be
Right.
sure this is, accurate. But I'm really lucky. We have a great team.
Yeah, that's really good because I was at a another F Suite event last week, and one of the topics that we parked on, and of course, that F Suite is primarily the members in there are finance leaders and primarily
Yep.
CFOs. And I remember a topic of conversation that we revolved around during this dinner happened to come down to Salesforce. There was a CFO that was kind of voicing his frustrations about the fact that, hey, even though I want to use it as my source of truth, because I need to go in there, I need to look at my numbers. They're applicable to the things that I report to the board and my executives. However, the salespeople don't seem to think that is the case, that they are able to run things like maybe this is, the 1990s and they can have their
Right.
notebook. Maybe they're outside salespeople. They drive around. They need to have their, Rolodex figuratively, but a notebook where they keep the notes, going in and entering that information into a CRM after a long day of outside sales might be a little bit cumbersome. But it was such a long conversation because it is a source of frustration for him. And I remember the verdict that came down is I think it was a pretty unanimous agreement across the table, especially from the CFOs that were helping suggest some options to him that, hey, this is the top-down approach. This is something
Yep.
that, hey, if your sales manager isn't able to get
Yep.
your reasoning as the CFO as to why you need to be in there and why you need to make sure that the data is hygienic and clean, then the sales manager is unable to communicate it down to the reps and the individual contributors. And if the CFO is able to communicate clearly to the leadership of revenue, then they are able to get that type of cohesion and making sure that, hey, Salesforce is what we live and breathe. This is where we store our information. Please make sure that everything is maintained. So I'm glad that at Clover, that is not an issue. You have a very open communication team where things are readily flowing. Maybe you're even talking about some strategic deals in Slack so that you're just
Yeah.
aware of where they are, but also in terms of numbers, you can easily go in there and get what you need.
Yeah, and I'm not saying everything's perfect, right?
Yeah,
But I've
sure.
definitely but I've
Never.
definitely experienced that problem many times at prior companies where it was hard to get the sales team to update Salesforce in the way that
Mm,
we as the finance team needed it updated and as regularly as we needed it updated, right?
yeah.
And I think the advice they gave is that's what I've seen work. And I do think that's part of why our sales team really understands what we're trying to accomplish here, and we're moving really quickly, and that's why I need them to update it as soon as they have an update. Hey, I emailed someone. Great, put it in there. Hey, I,
Yeah.
I spoke to this person. Here's the results. We'll send the contract next week. Whatever it is, make sure Salesforce is updated. So, and I actually have seen it at really large companies. I've seen the sales team do a really good job of updating it. So you can have it at large companies where they do a really good job updating it regularly for the finance team, and then you can also have trouble at larger companies. So if you do it right, it's possible for
Yeah,
sure.
most definitely. And yeah, with financial tools helping, provide a little bit more automation and just the ability to make better insight-driven decisions, it helps that the people that are entering the data are the ones to make sure that data hygiene is of high priority. I think it might just be, my age or when I was raised, but I was raised in the age of having a computer. I think you can
Yeah.
probably find a picture of me when I'm 5 or 6 years old in front of a computer because my dad was kind of that type of guy. He was kind of a computer nerd when things were, coming up in the mid 90s. I was born in
Yeah.
94. And to me, especially as a primarily inside salesperson, obviously I go and travel if I need to and meet clients in person, but primarily as an inside salesperson, Salesforce is how I keep my source of truth for all my notes for what's going
Yep.
on. I couldn't think of another way where I would be manually tracking my notes on each and every conversation that I have. So maybe with people around my age, it's just a little bit easier of a thought from an individual
Listen.
contributor level that, hey, I don't need another system. I don't keep things in a Google sheet about what's going on in my pipeline. It's Salesforce. And as long as we're unified on that, the CFO has a better chance of coming in here, getting the data that they need that is clear and also accurate for what they need in reporting.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, if the data they give the board is accidentally inaccurate because the sales team,
Oh,
didn't update Salesforce properly, I mean, it's
oh,
ultimately the CFO's responsibility, but like,
yeah.
they're going to come for someone, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's not in your best interest as a salesperson to not keep it updated because ultimately
for
they're going to
sure.
come back to you and be like, this deal said this in Salesforce, and this is what
Yeah.
we told investors.
Right. Most definitely. I agree. Well, Nicole, I want to ask you, a little bit more related to your background, but hey, as more women are kind of joining in the finance industry, what do you have to say to young women navigating the financial workforce, kind of starting off in their career? Maybe they're in 3 to 5 years in and have aspirations to get to the position and the roles that you have had the opportunity to take on. What kind of advice would you have for them now in this day and age?
That's a good question. The first thing that I would say is we need you, right? We know that finance has historically been dominated by men. And honestly, having women in the field just helps bring new perspective and new ideas to the table. And it's really important. Second, Shirley Chisholm once said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And I really believe that there are respectful and appropriate ways to do this. And speaking to women, I encourage you to fight for your right to be at the table, right?
Yeah.
Even if it means you're not allowed to speak in that meeting, that's fine. There have been a lot of meetings I've gone to, and I've been like, I promise I won't speak. Just let me be here. Let me just listen. Let me learn. And they were really important for my career. Third, having thick skin will get you far, just being honest. Like, always assume the best of people and just don't let comments people make impact you. Keep pushing forward and do your best no matter what. And fourth, in that same vein, seek out feedback, right?
Yeah.
You may not always think the feedback is accurate or fair, but you get to be the judge of whether you take it and apply it. And I think having thick skin will give you the ability to absorb the right feedback and reject the wrong feedback. So those
Right.
are kind of the main things that I would say to women, but most importantly, we need you. And if you think that if you really like it, but you think you're not good enough or you don't have the skill, I have dyscalculia. So I have dyslexia specifically with numbers, which has been a lot of fun being in finance. But like there are tools that help you, right? Like if you think you're not good enough or if you think something prevents you, it doesn't, right? Like
Right.
there are ways to work around it and ways to do it. If you love it, stick with it and keep going and you're going to be successful if you just push forward.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. I think, the really great thing about this is that, for a lot of high achieving professionals in their career, I think number three and number four can apply to anybody. It doesn't have to
Totally.
be just finance related. You don't have to come from a finance background, but as long as you're going out there seeking advice, doing what you can to continuously improve yourself, you will find your way and you will find your spot in this industry and whatever you want to do in your career. I love just that background, the snippet of what you shared of, hey, there are things that will help enable you to break through challenges and do what you need to be in the positions that you want to be. So those aspirations that you have, keep striving for it because there
Yeah.
is kind of a lack of women representation within this field. And I think you bring up a really good point because there is one other question that I wanted to ask you that's more when people talk about the shortage of accountants entering the profession, does that also permeate into the tech industry, or is that more of a CPA and the public accounting sector, or does it actually affect and impact our industry within software and technology?
I think it will
Sure.
for sure because I a lot of accountants get their start in historically the way it's been, right?
Yeah.
You go to college, you get your master's in accounting, you're in college for 5 years, right? And you graduate with a master's in accounting after 5 years and your undergrad degree. You go to KPMG, Deloitte, whatever. And then you go there for a few years, you do tax or audit. And then after that, they tend to, they can stay there or they'll go into the private sector, right? And the private sector includes startups. You don't often, it's definitely possible that accountants will leave their college education and come straight into the private sector. And we
Mm,
will probably see more of that going forward. But previously, it's very much been hey, we go to PwC, we work here for a little bit, and then we go into the private sector. So ultimately, if people aren't wanting to go work at PwC or Deloitte or KPMG anymore, then it's going to be harder on the back end of that funnel getting
right.
people into the private sector. And I think
It's
the
the
second
pipeline of
piece,
talent, more on a
yeah,
macroeconomic level. It's the pipeline of talent that usually funnels new talent to join startup industries, software and
yeah,
technology. And if we have limitations there, we're going to soon feel the effects. Maybe 5 years, 10 years, we don't know, but we will.
Yeah, and it'll be soon. But the second piece goes back to what I was
Wow.
saying about what they're looking for in CFOs nowadays. Used to be you had to be a CPA, right? Like you had to have a really strong accounting background. That's what they wanted. But people are really moving towards having a strategic FP&A background. So if there's less demand at the top for CFOs being
Right.
CPAs or strict accountants, and I don't think that's going to go away. I think there are still instances where that is going to be what they want. But if it's a lot less, then the demand for that type of skill set higher up is also lower. So less people are going to want, less really motivated individuals are going to want to pursue that career path because they're thinking, well, you know, it's going to be hard to even get a CFO job and that's what I want to do. So I'll just go into finance instead. Now,
Yeah.
you can also go into a deep conversation of AI and the potential for AI to do journal entries, right? Just, basic entry level accounting type things. Maybe AI could ultimately do that. And then what does it look like from an accounting perspective when they graduate? Where do they start? Because AI is doing the basic journal entries where, you might start
Right.
at bookkeeping. So, it's a really interesting conversation that I think it's really going to be interesting to see what happens between
Yeah.
AI and the talent pool and where all that goes.
Yeah, most definitely. But I also used to sell revenue recognition solutions. And I remember thinking, I'm sure I know that there is a human factor where you still need to get eyes on what the final output of our revenue recognition solution looks like. So there needs to be some human interference to make sure that there is a brief audit of what it's
Right.
crunching. But that if those systems get more and more refined and more honed in, that there is a possibility that maybe that entire responsibility of closing the books and recognizing
Yep.
revenue on ASC 606 compliance, that it
Yep.
would be taken care of by a system, kind of within the topic of today in financial automation and decision making. So that is really interesting. And it is kind of a test of time for us to really understand what is this collision of artificial intelligence, the shortage of professionals entering the accounting field. Will AI
Yep.
actually be able to take on those roles? At least the work towards the bottom where it's
Yeah.
more data crunching and things
More
like that. That it
bookkeeping. Yeah.
Right,
More
most
bookkeeping.
definitely. So it is a fascinating topic for us to, be able to talk about. And I'm sure that is something that we, should talk about in the future. But Nicole, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you here to wrap up the
Okay.
podcast. I really want to know about what your top finance tools look like. So given your experience over all of the different companies that you've been at, what are your top three finance tools in 2024 that you will not live without and that you just absolutely love and need by your side?
Well, Excel. Talking about that the whole
Boom.
time. I'm never gonna let it go. I really love QBO. I've used more advanced, and ultimately you have to have a more advanced system, but I love it. It's so easy to use.
Yeah.
And Maxio. I love Maxio. Been using it across multiple different companies for years, and it's always done what I needed it to be.
Yeah, love that. Well, Randy Wooten as well as Dan Owens, there's a quick shout out for you there from a current customer. That's awesome. And what is a financial jargon that you find absurd? Maybe you want to just remove it from the face of the earth. Maybe you want to swap it with something. But is there something that kind of crawls under your skin in terms of financial jargon that has developed over the years?
So it's not so much jargon, but I really hate it when people say finance instead of finance. Like, I feel
Oh,
like you're just
sure.
trying to sound smart. Like, just say finance. My dad says finance and it drives me up a wall. So that's like
Yeah.
my biggest thing. Just say finance.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Nicole. It's been a pleasure to host you and understand what the future of finance holds for us. What an amazing episode. I'm sure our listeners will have learned a lot from Nicole's experiences and her perspectives on the finance industry and how they can up their game in this field. You can connect with Nicole on LinkedIn to continue the conversation and check out the episode description for her LinkedIn and any additional resources mentioned. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and keep thriving in your financial journey. Thank you for tuning in.